Hey everybody, it's James Lindsay. You're listening to New Discourses Bullets, where I give a bullet point-like summary of one topic, single topic from woke Marxism that we need to understand so that we can defeat it. And what we need to understand is the George Soros dialectical method. Now, I've used a big word already, dialectical, and there have been some episodes already talking about the dialectic. The dialectic is a means of marrying a truth to a lie for politically operational purposes. That's a very simple way to define it. We could get into all the hairy details where it's that there's a thing and it's a concept and its opposite is found within it, and that's why things don't work out quite right. And so then the thing and its opposite have to be kind of reckoned as part of the same dynamic system so that they can be understood from a higher perspective. That's called the synthesis or whatever you want. And that's the kind of more formal idea of dialectics. So what you're going to do is therefore put in conflict something and its opposite to try to put them on the same footing and understand them as part of the same dynamic whole. In other words, so you can befuddle yourself. But in practice, the dialectical methods are methods of marrying truths and lies, of taking that which is not and mixing it with what is so that it's palatable and putting out something that's basically a bit of blended lie and truth. In other words, a distortion. And so the George Soros dialectical method that he outlines in his famous book from 1992, which I did a very long-form podcast about that I encourage you to listen to. This is a short summary of that longer podcast for easier, briefer listening, is called Reflexivity. He says that you can kind of separate the sciences into two categories. The physical sciences or the hard sciences follow the Popperian model. That's Karl Popper's model of falsifiability, universality, and so on. And they describe what appear to be objective facts. He says alchemy has no purchase, and in fact, the march of the hard sciences, particularly physics and chemistry and so on, even biology, have basically crowded out the alchemical from the hard sciences, and the reason is because of falsifiability. But then he says the social sciences operate differently. They are reflexive. What he says that means, what reflexive means, and he gives a very kind of banal definition of it that doesn't capture the truth of it. What reflexive means is that there's some kind of a feedback loop involved, and the participants in particular are part of the experiment. They are not separate from the experiment. So if we observe some physical process, maybe it's high school physics and we're shooting a cannonball. We shoot the cannonball, we are not part of the process. But by comparison, if we were to do an experiment on human beings, like let's see what kind of responses they give when prompted in a particular way, maybe like the Ash conformity experiment or whatever, the participants themselves are now part of the experiment. And in fact, the experimenter is part of the experiment. And so everything is actually confused. The participation in the experiment might predict its own results. And so this is a fundamentally different model of scientific inquiry. And maybe he has a point to that. It's not really important to digress into that much, but he also sees it, and this is what is important to talk about, as manipulable. He has a very famous statement in that book, The Alchemy of Finance, where he says where he describes a difference between the scientific method and what he calls alchemy. And he says that the point of alchemy is operational success, whereas the point of the scientific method is truth. He says, in fact, where the scientific method is concerned with truth, alchemy is concerned with operational success. So science is about what is, and alchemy is about what you want to bring about. In other words, it is a operational program. So that's why I said that the dialectical method that we're talking about is marrying a truth to a lie with a political purpose. That's what they do. And like I said, the key thing to really think about for reflexivity is a feedback loop. Soros's argument is that it's not truth that moves the world. It's actually what he calls fertile fallacies, which are things that are not correct, misunderstandings, misinformation, error, mistakes, that somehow cause people to act as though the incorrect information is correct. And that's really what's going on with reflexive. So if you can get people in a proactive way to misunderstand reality in an actionable way, you can create results that manifest, and I mean this, it's alchemy, right? That manifest a desired result. And that is the Soros method of reflexivity. Here's an example, the simplest example I know of for this the reflexive concept is what we all know about from, It's a Wonderful Life, a bank run. So let's say that you could convince, let's kind of go very, very simple. We have some kind of isolated town somewhere, and they have their town bank. It's very, not how things work in the real world, but just follow with me. We have this isolated bank out in an isolated town, and that's the bank for the town. And some charlatan or whatever comes along and starts convincing people that the bank doesn't have enough money to pay everybody their money, and it might be in trouble. The bank might be failing. This can create a reflexive condition where people believe the bank is failing, so then they act in a way that causes the bank to fail. So as you know, banks only hold a small percentage of the total value that's invested in them. Most of it's out in the world doing work. It's loaned out. And so what can happen? Maybe it's 10%. We'll just say it's 10%. So 90% of the money that's on paper in the bank is actually out in the world, and it's not at the bank. Well, you convince people the bank is going to fail, and everybody runs to the bank and asks for their money, and they take out their money, and pretty soon the bank is now insolvent because 100% of the money, in principle, maybe 50% of the money is being requested, but only 10% of it is there. This causes the bank to fail. So the reflexive thing here is people can be led to believe the bank is going to fail. That leads them to act in a way so that they make the bank fail. So it's a statement, a reflexive statement is not one that's true or false. It's one that becomes true or false based on whether or not people believe it. And Soros's idea is that you can manipulate people into that condition to achieve ends in the world. And that is a dialectic. He says it's a dialectic. He says, in fact, that it's a dialectic that leaves behind both Hegel and Marx. He says, in fact, that it is the dialectic that he took to the CCP in China in the late 1980s, and they loved it because it allowed them to move past where they were stuck with Marxist dialectical materialism up to that point and to adopt a new method, which is ultimately mass formation psychosis. What Soros actually says about reflexivity is that history moves in chaotic times. So when you have a chaotic time, he says people are desperate for guideposts, anything to tell them what to do. So you hear the bank is failing, you think, oh my God, you understand maybe that if you take your money out, you contribute to the failure of the bank, but if you don't take your money out, then you might lose all your money if the bank fails, and they are looking for what to do. And so if you insert guideposts into the chaos, or rather if you generate the chaos first and then insert guideposts into the chaos, then you can guide the organization, the entity, the town, the country, the world where you want it to go. In other words, alchemy is not concerned with truth like scientific methods. It is in fact concerned with operational success. And if your operation is to destroy a currency, destroy a bank, destroy a stock, destroy a country, then this method's great. So what would reflexivity look like in practice? What reflexivity often looks like in practice is you have to generate that chaos so that there is a feedback loop of distrust in something or too much trust in something so that people act in accordance. Everything's going to change. So everybody goes and does whatever it is to make the thing change. You have to make them believe that either we'll say it's a stock. Some stock is going to crash, so they all sell, crashing it, or that some stock is going to boom, so they all buy it, so the stock booms. That's the idea. And you create that illusion by putting out, as he calls them, guideposts to derange the population. That's it, where you marry truths and lies. What's an example? Let's take the example of a stock, and let's use the stock of Boeing, the aircraft manufacturer. So it would be illegal for, say, George Soros or his firm to buy or to short sell a bunch of Boeing stock. But let's say that he wants to short sell Boeing and get rich and maybe crash Boeing as a company. Maybe he has more than one objective here. It would be illegal for his firm to just start trashing Boeing while they buy short positions on Boeing stock. That's not going to work. But what's not illegal would be to set yourself up to short sell Boeing and then just pay journalists to tell the truth in a very selective way about Boeing. What do I mean? So maybe you hire journalists to find every safety lapse, every problem, every mechanical issue, every major delay, every single crack, minor or serious maintenance issue, overflowing toilet, doesn't matter, and you write an article that's going to go on the internet in a major publication, something at least as big as something like Business Insider, which, by the way, I picked that because it's publishing tons of exactly this kind of article, or somewhere bigger. Meanwhile, maybe you start talking about this new rise on the horizon of their Chinese competitor, Comac, the commercial aviation of China, which is owned by the Chinese military, which that's a whole story in and of itself. We won't get into the conspiracies there, but they seem to be real and they seem to be deep. And it seems to be a big problem. So now you start saying Boeing has this dark horse competitor arising in the market. Can Boeing weather it? But by the way, look at all these continuous problems that Boeing has. And even the things that you also are promoting. You maybe promote Boeing having to have, environmental policies that are not in line with its mission of producing aircraft. And you maybe have them, you push diversity quotas for hiring or promotion or whatever. Maybe you set it up so that their ESG score goes up, as it does if their corporate board implements ESG. And you reward them by making one of the policies that you raise your ESG score for, good governance at the company, being that you give higher executive compensation to the executives who implement ESG, and lower if they're less willing. Turns out they're doing that. That's there. It's in their SEC filings. So you create these conditions to where Boeing is now overvalued, and people are coming to see that Boeing is overvalued. So what's going to happen? They're going to start to distrust Boeing, think that maybe it's not an institutional favorite or a long-term cash cow. So they divest from Boeing stock. They get out of Boeing stock, and Boeing stock crashes. And maybe Boeing itself collapses as a result. But if you arranged it so that you or your friends had a short sell position on that, or an investment in one of its competitors, you didn't do anything illegal. You just created a reflexive environment in which people would believe that Boeing has major problems. And so maybe it wasn't so wise to be investing in Boeing right now. And the way that he lays this out with the market, Soros lays this out with the market, is that once you start to see kind of herd behavior in the market, somebody starts buying something, everybody starts buying something, that same something, or somebody starts selling out. Why is Boeing all of a sudden seeing so much of its stock being sold? Why are people getting rid of Boeing? Oh my God, there must be something they know about Boeing, something wrong with it. That's reflexive. There must be something they know. And so then more people sell Boeing. So this is the nature of reflexive feedback loops. This is the method they are using to push everything. You're going to see reflexive pushes against capitalism, the reflexive push for democracy that's coming from the Democrats, using a twisted definition of democracy that follows from Lenin, or if you want, Plato, that actually represents a tyranny of the appearance of a possessed majority. But what it is actually that you silence all the people or disenfranchise all the people who don't support your tyranny, and then you call it democratic. That's what Lenin did. That's what Stalin did. That's what Mao did. That's what Plato envisioned into some sense. And so that is the democracy that they're pushing. We're seeing reflexive pushes for all of this. We see reflexive pushes that there's a rise of anti-LGBTQ hate. We see reflexive pushes that, there's some kind of a crisis here or there or whatever. And what the goal is to agitate people. Your target's reaction is your real action. You're trying to agitate people into taking action that makes that claim come true. You're planting a belief so that they will go out and socially reify it. Reify means make real. Largely through kind of artificial means like social consensus. And that is the Soros method. That's what Soros is about. Why is he attacking the U.S.? Just to give you the quick summary, he thinks that the United States is inherently overvalued. That prevents us from having a fair and equitable world. If the U.S. is too rich and too powerful, that means there's an exclusion and an exploitation of others. So he wants to end that. But he also believes that anytime you have an overvalued asset, as he sees it, that the market needs a correction. So somebody might as well come along and pop the bubble and profit off of the bubble popping. And so that's what you would be doing. So what would you do if you were going to do a reflexive maneuver to undermine belief in the value of America so that you could basically short sell America or Canada or whatever country you want? Well, you'd convince the young people in that country, for example, that their country sucks. You would fill the country with crime, with border problems, with a kind of very demoralizing condition where the crime isn't actually prosecuted. And you start to see kind of all of the things that corrupt politicians. You start to see all of the kind of things that are happening that are funded by the Open Society Foundation. You would create tremendous amounts of division using identity politics. But of course, that's the vehicle also to really make people believe that their country sucks, young people in particular. And so what you can get is if you get a massive kind of divestment in belief in America or Canada or whatever country, Australia, whatever, then the country is in fact overvalued. And so now you've created the condition that you started with through a reflexive method by pushing narratives, by pushing lies mixed with truth. Go back to Boeing. Is it true that all these Boeing aircraft have, cracked windshield, a loose bolt or whatever it happens to be? And I'm not talking about the door flying off. That was a real problem, right? I'm talking about these little things. Is it true? Yeah, those are true things, but they're lies in that they're not relevant. There are minor mechanical and other issues, like maybe somebody acting up on a Boeing jet and they have to force a land. It doesn't have anything to do with the jet being Boeing, right? But there are minor mechanical issues on planes all the time. They have been all along. In fact, this has been a trend all along. And so you just start reporting on that all the time. Or maybe you start reporting on every small forest fire, some of which somebody sets, their arson, and all of a sudden there's an illusion of climate change. Or you start reporting on every extreme weather event like it's Snowmageddon or Tornado Palooza or whatever. And now there's climate change weather disaster. This method has been used against us in a psychological operation field for a very long time, virtually ubiquitously from the media, which is addicted to the method because it ramps up people's emotions and then it turns around with ramped up emotions and enables them to sell the things that are in the advertisements between the sections. And that reflexive method can be instantiated, frankly, just by paying journalistic outlets to focus on certain kinds of stories in order to position things to move socially through mass formation psychosis or herd behavior in desired operational directions. So that's the Soros method. That's how it works. That's what the CCP has updated its Marxist dialectic with. That's what the World Economic Forum and all these global elites in the United Nations and so on, that's the method they use. That's why it's so much narrative warfare, because this so-called shoelace dialectic that Soros lays out is designed to create currents of mass formation psychosis that have desired political endpoints. And that means massive psychological operations in all directions that are actually comprehensible. And when you can comprehend them, the magic trick doesn't work. Remember, this is a revolutionary moment. That's a reflexive statement. If everybody believes it, we must go into the Capitol. That's a reflexive statement. If everybody believes it, you end up with something politically useful. If nobody believes it, it falls on its face. And that's what we have to do, is we have to understand that this is a manipulation, that this is probably how information is frequently being presented to us, especially with current big politically charged topics everybody has to talk about right now. This information is being presented to us in this fashion. And when you realize that, you can step back from it and stay cooler about it and not get engaged and not reify the portions of the operation that they need. In other words, you can stop its track toward operational success rather than contributing to it when you understand that this is how you're being manipulated. So that's George Soros's dialectical method, which is called reflexivity. You can read about it in The Alchemy of Finance, where he also tells you that he thinks he's a god with a messiah complex in the epilogue, or you can listen to my long podcast where I explain how this works by reading a great deal from that book to you. I encourage you to understand that this is the primary tool, the narrative warfare tool that we're all being subjected to. And it is dialectical. It does derive from the same sources as Marxism derives from, even if it's not exactly the same as Marxism. So that's the world we live in. And the more we understand, the better we can do to defend ourselves against it.